I woke up on my son's wedding day and reached for my hair, but my fingers found nothing at all. For a moment, I thought I was still dreaming, the kind where your body feels unfamiliar and the world doesn't quite make sense. But the cold air against my scalp was real, sharp, undeniable, and it pulled me fully awake. I sat up slowly in the guest room they had prepared for me, sunlight slipping through the sheer curtains, everything peaceful in a way that felt almost cruel given what I had just discovered. My heart didn't race, not the way you might expect. It slowed. It settled into something steady, something observant. I stood and walked to the mirror across the room, each step measured, each breath controlled, and when I looked at my reflection, there it was, my hair unevenly cut close to my head, not gone completely, but taken enough to leave no doubt that this had been done intentionally, carefully, while I slept. I lifted a hand and gently traced the edges, noticing the irregular lines, the places where whoever had done this hadn't rushed but hadn't cared about precision either. This wasn't a mistake. This was a message. And the moment that realization settled in, something inside me shifted. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I simply stood there, studying the woman in the mirror, a woman who had spent 68 years building a life, raising a son, surviving the loss of a husband, and still choosing kindness even when it wasn't returned. Today was supposed to be a celebration, Daniel's wedding day, a day I had imagined for decades, a day I had quietly helped shape behind the scenes, from writing checks to stepping back whenever I felt unwelcome, telling myself it was normal, that mothers fade into the background eventually. But this was not fading. This was erasure. I turned away from the mirror and glanced around the room, taking in every detail as if I were seeing it for the first time, the neatly folded dress on the chair, the small welcome basket on the nightstand, the untouched glass of water beside it. Everything looked perfect on the surface, curated, intentional, just like the woman who was about to become my daughter-in-law. Ashley Bennett, with her polished smile and careful words, always just warm enough to pass, never quite genuine enough to feel real. I thought back to the night before, the way she had insisted I stay here instead of driving back to my hotel, the way she had handed me a cup of tea with that same practiced smile, telling me I needed to rest for the big day ahead. At the time, I had thanked her. Now, standing in that quiet room with the evidence resting on my own head, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. This wasn't about a wedding. This was about control. And as I reached for the silk scarf folded neatly beside my dress, I made a decision that surprised even me. I would not ruin this day. I would not cause a scene. I would not give her the reaction she was expecting. Instead, I would watch. I would listen. And I would remember everything. I wrapped the silk scarf carefully around my head, not to hide what had been done, but to control when it would be seen, and as I tied it into a neat knot at the nape of my neck, I studied my reflection one more time, making sure there was no trace of panic left in my eyes, because panic is what people like Ashley feed on. It is what gives them power, and I had no intention of offering her that. The hallway outside was already alive with quiet movement when I stepped out, the soft hum of voices, the distant clatter of dishes being arranged for breakfast, everything moving forward exactly as planned, as if nothing had happened at all. I walked slowly, deliberately, taking in every detail, every face, every glance, because today, more than ever, I needed to see clearly. When I entered the kitchen, Ashley was standing by the counter, holding a cup of coffee, her posture relaxed, her expression composed in that effortless way she had perfected. And when her eyes landed on me, there was a flicker there, quick, almost invisible, but I caught it, a brief tightening around her smile, a question answered before it was even asked. She had been waiting to see how I would react. "Good morning, Margaret," she said, her voice light, almost musical, as if this were any other morning, as if she had not stepped into my room hours earlier and changed something deeply personal about me. "I hope you slept well. Today is going to be such a beautiful day." I returned her smile, just as calm, just as measured. "I slept very well, thank you," I replied, my voice steady, my tone warm enough to satisfy anyone listening, but neutral enough to give her nothing. I moved past her and poured myself a cup of coffee, noticing how her gaze lingered just a moment too long on the scarf, as if she were trying to decide whether I knew, whether I understood, whether her message had landed the way she intended. Daniel walked in a few seconds later, adjusting the cuff of his shirt, already dressed for the ceremony, his face bright with anticipation. And when he saw me, his expression softened in that familiar way that still, even now, had the power to reach something inside me. "Mom, you look great," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek, completely unaware of what had been done, completely unaware of the quiet storm standing just a few feet away from him. I placed a hand lightly on his arm, grounding myself in the moment. "So do you," I said, allowing myself a small smile, because whatever else was happening, he was still my son, and this was still his day. But as I stood there between them, something became undeniably clear. This was not impulsive. This was not careless. This had been planned, timed, executed with precision, and that meant there would be traces, small ones, quiet ones, but traces nonetheless. I took a slow sip of my coffee and let my eyes drift casually around the room, noting the arrangement of things, the placement of bags near the door, the faint smell of hairspray lingering in the air, out of place for a kitchen, subtle, but present. And then I saw it, barely noticeable, on the sleeve of Ashley's robe, a few short strands of silver hair clinging to the fabric, catching the morning light just enough to be seen if you were looking closely. And I was looking closely now. I said nothing. I reacted to nothing. Instead, I stored it away, another piece of a puzzle that was beginning to take shape. Ashley followed my gaze for the briefest second before casually brushing at her sleeve, as if she had suddenly remembered something. Her movement smooth, but just a fraction too quick, and that was all I needed to confirm what I already knew. She was not worried about what she had done. She was worried about whether I could prove it. And as the room filled with more voices, more laughter, more carefully arranged happiness, I realized something else just as important. She was expecting me to either disappear quietly or break apart publicly, and I was going to do neither. I set my cup down gently on the counter, adjusted the edge of my scarf with calm precision, and allowed myself one final look at her, not with anger, not with accusation, but with something far more unsettling, understanding. Because the truth was, this day was not only a wedding. It was a test, and she had just made the first move. By the time we arrived at the venue, the world had already arranged itself into something picture-perfect. Rows of white chairs lined across the manicured lawn, soft music drifting through the air, guests moving in gentle clusters of conversation, all of it curated to reflect a day that was meant to be flawless. And I walked into it with my head held steady, the silk scarf resting neatly in place, not as a shield, but as a decision. People greeted me with polite warmth, some with genuine affection, others with the kind of courtesy reserved for someone who no longer holds center stage, and I responded to each of them with the same measured grace, because I had spent a lifetime learning how to exist in rooms where I was expected to take up less space than I deserved. Ashley stood near the front, surrounded by her bridesmaids, radiant in a way that seemed almost practiced, her laughter light, her posture effortless, every movement designed to draw attention. And yet when she noticed me approaching, there it was again, that flicker, that almost imperceptible pause as her eyes moved to the scarf and then back to my face, searching for something, a crack, a sign, any indication that I had been shaken. I gave her none. "Margaret, you made it," she said, stepping forward with open arms, her voice carrying just enough volume to be overheard, just enough to perform kindness for the audience around us. I accepted the embrace briefly, noting how carefully she positioned herself, how her hand brushed lightly against the edge of my scarf as if, by accident, testing, probing, confirming. "Of course," I replied softly, stepping back before she could linger. "I would not miss this." Daniel joined us moments later, his expression bright, unaware, moving between us with the easy trust of someone who believes the people he loves are exactly who they claim to be. And for a second, I allowed myself to feel that familiar ache, not of loss, but of clarity, because I could see now how carefully everything had been constructed around him, how gently he had been guided to see only what he was meant to see. The ceremony began soon after, and I took my seat near the aisle, close enough to witness every detail, every exchange, every glance that might otherwise go unnoticed. And as the music shifted and Ashley made her entrance, the entire crowd turned toward her, captivated, just as she intended, her smile radiant, her steps measured, her presence commanding. I watched her closely, not with resentment, but with precision, noticing the way her gaze moved across the crowd, how it lingered for a fraction of a second on me before continuing forward, as if she were checking that her work had been displayed, that her message had been delivered. I folded my hands neatly in my lap and remained still, allowing the moment to unfold without interruption, because timing, I had learned, is not about acting quickly, it is about acting when it matters. As the officiant spoke and the vows were exchanged, the atmosphere softened into something almost sacred, the kind of quiet that invites belief, that convinces everyone present that they are witnessing something pure and meaningful, and perhaps for Daniel, it was. But beneath that surface, I could feel the tension of something else, something carefully hidden, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. When the ceremony concluded and the applause rose around us, Ashley turned slightly toward the guests, her hand lifting in a small gesture that drew attention, and then, with a softness that seemed almost accidental, she reached toward me from across the short distance between us, her fingers grazing the edge of my scarf again, this time with just enough intent to suggest that it might slip, that it might reveal what lay beneath. It was subtle, it was calculated, and it told me everything I needed to know. She was not finished. She was building toward something. And as I adjusted the scarf with calm precision, meeting her eyes for the briefest moment, I allowed a quiet understanding to settle between us, not spoken, not acknowledged, but unmistakably present. She believed she was in control of this moment. She believed she was orchestrating the outcome. And I let her believe it, because sometimes the most powerful move is not to interrupt the performance, but to let it continue until the truth can no longer be ignored. The reception unfolded with the same careful elegance as the ceremony, tables dressed in soft ivory linens, crystal glasses catching the afternoon light, every detail arranged to suggest harmony and celebration, and I moved through it all with quiet intention, never rushing, never hesitating, allowing myself to be seen exactly as I chose to be seen. Guests approached me with polite compliments, some mentioning how graceful I looked, others commenting on the scarf with gentle curiosity, and I answered each remark with a calm smile, offering nothing more than what was necessary, because every word today felt like something to be measured, something to be placed deliberately, like pieces on a board I was only beginning to understand. Ashley remained at the center of it all, circulating effortlessly, her laughter rising above the hum of conversation, her presence carefully maintained, but I noticed how often her eyes drifted in my direction, how frequently she checked to see whether I had broken, whether I had faltered, whether the quiet humiliation she had orchestrated had taken root the way she intended. It had not. Instead, it had given me something far more valuable, clarity. I took my seat when dinner was announced, positioned at a table not too far from the head of the room, close enough to observe, far enough to remain outside the immediate spotlight, and as I settled in, I allowed myself to slow down, to listen, to notice the small details that often go overlooked when emotions run high. A server passed behind me carrying a tray of drinks, the faint scent of perfume lingering in the air, and for a brief moment, it reminded me of the night before, that same subtle note that had seemed out of place then and felt even more deliberate now. I turned slightly in my chair, my gaze following the movement without drawing attention, and I saw her, one of the event staff, a young woman with nervous eyes who avoided looking directly at anyone for too long, her hands steady but her posture tense in a way that suggested she was carrying more than just a tray of glasses. When she passed by again, I caught her attention with a gentle nod, nothing commanding, nothing urgent, just enough to invite a moment without raising suspicion, and when she leaned in slightly, I spoke in a tone soft enough to be lost in the surrounding noise. "You were here last night, were you not?" I asked, my voice even, my expression neutral. She hesitated, just for a second, before nodding. "Yes, ma'am," she replied quietly. I held her gaze, not with pressure, but with patience, allowing the silence to stretch just enough to make space for honesty. "Did you happen to notice anything unusual in the hallway upstairs?" I asked, choosing my words carefully, giving her room to answer without feeling cornered. Her eyes flickered, uncertainty passing through them, and for a moment, I thought she might retreat into polite denial, but then she exhaled softly, as if releasing something she had been holding on to. "I saw someone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Late, around 2 in the morning. She came out of one of the rooms. I did not think it was my place to say anything. I did not need to ask who. The answer was already clear, already confirmed in ways that went beyond words. But hearing it spoken, even in that quiet, hesitant way, anchored it into something undeniable. I gave a small nod, offering her a reassuring smile that carried no judgment, only acknowledgement, and she moved on, disappearing back into the rhythm of the event as if nothing had happened. I returned my attention to the room, my hands resting lightly in my lap, my posture composed, my expression unchanged, but inside, the pieces were aligning, each detail finding its place, each observation reinforcing what I already knew. This had been deliberate, this had been planned, and most importantly, this had not been done in complete secrecy. There were witnesses, however small, however quiet, and that meant the truth was not buried, only waiting. I lifted my glass and took a slow sip, letting the moment settle, letting the realization take shape without urgency, because urgency would only serve her. And I had no intention of playing into her design. Across the room, Ashley raised her glass in a toast, her voice bright, her smile flawless, thanking everyone for being part of such a special day. And as the room responded with warm applause, I watched her carefully, not with anger, not with resentment, but with something far more precise. Understanding. Because in her performance, in her confidence, in her belief that she controlled the narrative, she had overlooked something simple, something critical. She had assumed that silence meant weakness, and she was about to learn that it did not. I remained seated long after the applause faded, my glass untouched now, my attention no longer drifting but focused with quiet precision. Because once you begin to see clearly, you cannot return to the comfort of assumptions. The room had settled into that familiar rhythm of celebration, laughter rising in waves, plates being cleared, music shifting into something lighter, something meant to signal that the formalities were over and the evening could unfold freely. And in that shift, I noticed something else, a loosening, a subtle relaxation in Ashley's posture, as if she believed the most important part of her plan had already succeeded. She moved from table to table, accepting compliments, leaning into conversations, her confidence growing with each passing minute. And yet, every so often, her gaze returned to me, checking, measuring, confirming that I remained exactly where she expected me to be, composed, silent, contained. I allowed her that comfort. I allowed her to believe that her silence had been interpreted correctly. Because the truth was, I was not silent out of defeat. I was silent because I was listening. I stood slowly, smoothing the fabric of my dress, and made my way toward the far end of the room where a small cluster of vendors had gathered near the service entrance. People who existed on the edges of events like this, present but rarely noticed, their roles essential but their presence often overlooked. These were the people who saw everything. The coordinator, a woman in her early 40s with a clipboard tucked neatly under her arm, greeted me with polite professionalism, her smile warm but measured, the kind that comes from managing countless events and understanding that every detail matters. "Everything going well for you?" she asked, her tone practiced, her eyes attentive. I returned her smile with equal calm. "It is a beautiful event," I said, and then, after a brief pause that softened the transition, I added, "I was curious about something from last night. There was quite a bit of activity upstairs, was there not?" Her expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough to signal that my question had landed somewhere specific. "We had a few late deliveries," she replied carefully, her professionalism holding steady, but I noticed the way her fingers adjusted slightly on the clipboard, the way her gaze flickered for just a second before returning to mine. "Of course," I said gently, as if accepting that explanation without resistance, and then I added, just as softly, "I only asked because I was told someone accessed the guest rooms around 2 in the morning. I imagine that is not standard procedure." The air between us changed, not tense, but aware, as if we had both stepped into a conversation that required a different kind of attention. She hesitated, weighing her response, and then lowered her voice just enough to separate it from the surrounding noise. "It is not typical," she admitted. "We did have a request from the bride to allow access for a personal item she said had been left behind. I did not think much of it at the time. That was all I needed. Not a confession, not an accusation, just confirmation that the door had been opened, that permission had been granted, that the movement I was tracing had not been imagined. I nodded, offering her a look of appreciation that carried no blame, only understanding, and stepped back, allowing her to return to her responsibilities without further interruption. As I turned away, I felt the final piece settle into place, not with a sense of triumph, but with clarity so complete it left no room for doubt. This had been orchestrated, authorized, executed with intention and confidence. And now, standing in the middle of a room filled with celebration, I understood something Ashley did not. Control is not proven by what you can do in secret. It is revealed by what happens when the truth is no longer contained. I walked back toward the center of the reception, my steps unhurried, my expression unchanged, and as I approached the table where Ashley stood speaking with a group of guests, she turned toward me once again, her smile ready, her posture open, her performance flawless. For a brief moment, our eyes met, and in that silence, I let her see it. Not anger, not pain, but certainty. Because the difference between us was no longer subtle. She believed the story was hers to tell, and I knew it had only just begun. The music shifted into something livelier as the evening moved forward, and with it, the energy in the room changed. People standing, glasses raised, laughter growing louder, the kind of atmosphere that invites attention to wander, that encourages small moments to pass unnoticed. And I understood immediately that this was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment when distraction would make subtle actions easier to disguise as accidents. Ashley stepped toward the center of the floor, drawing the attention of those nearby with a bright smile and a soft gesture of her hand, announcing that she wanted to thank everyone personally for being there, her voice carrying just enough to gather a crowd without feeling forced. And as people turned toward her, I remained where I was, watching not just her, but the space around her, the way she positioned herself, the distance between us, the angle of her movement. "Margaret," she called gently, her tone warm, inviting, almost affectionate, as if there had never been anything but kindness between us. "Would you come stand with us for a moment?" It was a simple request, one that would seem harmless to anyone listening, one that would appear respectful, even thoughtful, and yet beneath it, I could see the intention clearly, the setup, the careful arrangement of timing and attention. I stood without hesitation, smoothing my dress once more, and walked toward her with the same calm composure I had carried all day, each step steady, each movement deliberate, because I knew now that whatever she had planned would not rely on force. It would rely on suggestion, on the illusion of accident, on the willingness of others to believe what they saw without questioning how it came to be. As I reached her side, she turned slightly, positioning herself just close enough to make physical proximity unavoidable, her smile widening as she addressed the guests once more, thanking them again, her words flowing easily, but her focus divided, part of her attention always returning to me, measuring distance, timing, opportunity. I felt it before. It happened, not physically, but instinctively, that subtle shift in her posture, the slight movement of her hand, the way her fingers brushed once more against the edge of my scarf, this time not as a test, but as an attempt, gentle enough to pass as an accident, deliberate enough to achieve its purpose. But I had already adjusted for it. My hand rose calmly, almost gracefully, as if I were simply smoothing the fabric, securing it in place before it could shift, the motion so natural that no one around us would question it. No one would see it as anything more than a woman ensuring her appearance remained composed. Ashley's hand lingered for a fraction of a second longer than necessary before retreating, her smile never faltering, but her eyes revealing something new, something sharper, a flicker of irritation, perhaps even surprise, because the moment she had constructed had not unfolded the way she expected. I turned slightly toward her, my expression unchanged, my voice soft enough to remain between us, yet clear enough to be understood. "Careful," I said gently, not as a warning, but as an observation, and for the first time, her smile tightened just enough to reveal that she had heard the meaning beneath the word. The guests continued to listen, unaware, engaged in her performance, responding with polite laughter and applause, while beneath that surface, the balance had shifted, not dramatically, not visibly, but enough. She had made her move, and it had not landed. And more importantly, she knew that I knew. The moment passed, her speech concluded, the attention of the room dispersing once more into smaller conversations, and she stepped away, her composure returning quickly, her confidence rebuilding itself in subtle ways. But the ease she had carried earlier was no longer quite the same. I remained where I was for a moment longer, allowing the silence to settle, allowing the shift to take root, because this was no longer about preventing what she intended. It was about allowing her to continue, to reveal more, to move further into a space where her actions could no longer be explained away. I adjusted the scarf once more, not out of necessity, but as a reminder to myself of what had been done and what was still to come, and as I lifted my gaze across the room, finding her once again. Among the guests, I understood something with absolute clarity. She was no longer testing me. She was trying to provoke me, and that meant she was beginning to lose control. The evening settled into a softer rhythm as the first dance approached, the lights dimming slightly, conversations quieting into a collective anticipation, and I could feel the shift ripple through the room, the way attention gathered once again toward the center, toward them, toward the image of something perfect that everyone wanted to believe in. I remained at the edge of it, close enough to see every expression, every subtle movement, but far enough to remain outside the immediate focus, because distance, I had learned, allows you to see what others miss. Daniel took Ashley's hand, leading her gently onto the floor, his expression open, sincere, completely unaware of the undercurrent that had shaped this entire day. And for a moment, I allowed myself to watch him, not as part of this unfolding tension, but simply as my son, the boy I had raised, the man I had hoped would always be able to recognize truth when it stood in front of him. The music began, slow and familiar, and as they moved together, the room softened, guests leaning in, smiles forming, cameras lifting, everything aligning into that expected image of joy. And yet, even within that, I noticed her, the way Ashley's gaze occasionally drifted beyond Daniel, scanning the room, searching, always searching, and each time her eyes found me, there was something sharper there now, something that had replaced the easy confidence she had worn earlier. She was no longer entirely certain, and uncertainty makes people careless. As the dance continued, I stepped quietly toward the side of the room where the audiovisual equipment had been set up, a small station managed by a young technician who was focused on adjusting sound levels, his attention absorbed in his work, and I approached without urgency, offering a polite smile that invited cooperation rather than demanded it. "Everything sounds beautiful," I said softly, allowing my voice to blend naturally into the moment, and he nodded with a quick, appreciative glance. "Thank you, ma'am," he replied, returning to his controls. I paused just long enough to seem casual, then added, "I was told there may be some additional footage from last night, something the bride wanted included later this evening. Would that be in your system?" It was a simple question, framed as curiosity, not accusation, and it landed exactly as intended. He hesitated, his hand pausing over the console, his expression shifting just enough to confirm what I needed. "There was a late request," he admitted, lowering his voice slightly. "Some hallway footage from the security cameras, but it was not part of the main program. I was asked to hold it." I nodded slowly, as if this were merely a detail, something of passing interest. "Would you mind showing me where it is stored?" I asked, my tone steady, my posture relaxed, giving him no reason to refuse. He glanced toward the dance floor, then back at me, and after a brief moment, he turned the monitor slightly, so I could see, navigating through a series of files until the footage appeared, grainy but clear enough to recognize shapes, movement, timestamps marking the quiet hours of the night before. And there it was, exactly as described, a figure moving down the hallway, pausing at a door, entering without hesitation, emerging minutes later, her silhouette unmistakable even without detail, even without sound. I did not react. I did not lean in. I simply observed, letting the image confirm what had already been established, letting it settle into something concrete, something undeniable. "Thank you," I said gently, stepping back, allowing him to return the screen to its original position, his attention shifting once more to the music as if nothing had happened. I turned away from the equipment and let my gaze return to the dance floor, where the final notes of the song were fading, where applause was beginning to rise again, where Ashley lifted her face toward Daniel with that same flawless smile, that same carefully constructed image of warmth. And I realized then that everything she had done had been built on one assumption, that no one would look closely enough, that no one would question the narrative she presented. But now, the narrative was no longer hers alone. I adjusted the edge of my scarf once more, not out of necessity, but as a quiet acknowledgement of the moment. And as the applause grew louder, as the room filled once again with celebration, I stood there with a calm that no longer came from restraint, but from certainty. Because the truth was no longer something I suspected. It was something I could show. And the only question left was when. The applause faded into a steady hum of conversation once more. But something had changed, not in the room, not in the music, not in the carefully arranged celebration, but in me. Because clarity has a way of settling into your posture, your breathing, the way you move through space without hesitation. And as I stepped away from the edge of the dance floor, I knew that waiting any longer would only serve the illusion she had worked so hard to maintain. The next moment had to belong to the truth. I moved calmly toward the audiovisual station again, my steps unhurried, my expression composed. And when the technician looked up, I offered the same polite smile as before, the same quiet tone that invited cooperation without resistance. "There is one more thing I would like to do," I said gently, my voice steady, carrying no urgency, no tension. He hesitated, just for a second, but something in my demeanor reassured him, perhaps the absence of drama, the lack of confrontation, the sense that whatever I intended would not disrupt the event in a way that could not be contained. "Could you play that clip?" I continued, just briefly, before the next announcement. He glanced toward the coordinator, then back at me, and after a moment, he nodded, adjusting a few controls, preparing the screen that had been used earlier for the couple's photo montage. The room had not yet noticed, conversations continuing, glasses clinking, laughter rising and falling. But then the lights shifted slightly, just enough to draw attention forward, just enough to signal that something was about to be shown. Ashley turned instinctively, her body responding before her expression did, her eyes moving toward the screen, curiosity flickering across her face, followed quickly by something else, something sharper, something that had not been there before. Uncertainty. The screen flickered to life, the soft images of the wedding slideshow dissolving into something grainier, darker, the quiet hallway from the night before appearing without introduction, without explanation, just a moment suspended in time, and for a few seconds, the room did not understand what they were seeing. A few guests leaned forward. Some frowned slightly. The music softened, then stopped entirely. And then the figure appeared, moving down the hallway, pausing at a door, entering with quiet confidence, emerging minutes later, her posture unmistakable even in silhouette. The room shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. Enough for people to begin connecting what they were seeing with what they had not yet been told. I did not look at the screen. I looked at her. Ashley stood perfectly still, her smile gone now, not replaced with panic, not yet, but with something far more revealing, calculation, the rapid assessment of what could still be controlled, what could still be denied, what could still be explained away. But there are moments when explanation arrives too late. I stepped forward then, not into the center, not into the spotlight, but just enough to be seen, just enough to be heard without raising my voice. And when I spoke, it was not with anger, not with accusation, but with clarity that carried further than any volume could. "I believe this belongs to today as much as anything else," I said simply, my words measured, my tone calm, allowing the implication to settle on its own. No shouting, no confrontation, just truth placed gently into the room where it could no longer be ignored. Daniel turned toward the screen, then toward Ashley, confusion forming first, then something deeper, something slower, the beginning of understanding. And for the first time all day, the carefully constructed image began to fracture, not loudly, not violently, but quietly, in the space between what was shown and what had been believed. I remained where I was, my posture steady, my expression unchanged, because this was never about humiliation, not for me, not for her. It was about exposure. And exposure does not need to be forced. It only needs to be allowed. The clip ended. The screen dimmed. The room held its breath for a moment that felt longer than it was. And in that silence, everything shifted. Not with chaos, not with noise, but with awareness. And that was enough. No one spoke at first, and in that silence, the truth did what it always does when it is finally given space. It settled into the room without asking for permission, without needing to be explained, and I could see it in the way people looked at each other, in the way their expressions shifted from confusion to quiet realization, the kind that does not arrive all at once, but unfolds in small, undeniable pieces. Daniel was the first to move, not quickly, not dramatically, but with a kind of hesitation that revealed more than any reaction could have, his gaze moving from the darkened screen back to Ashley, searching her face for something that would restore what he believed this day to be, something that would make sense of what he had just seen. Ashley, he said softly, her name carrying a question he had not yet formed into words. And for a moment, she did what she had done all day. She smiled. That same practiced, effortless expression, as if she could smooth over what had just been shown with the same ease she had controlled everything else. "It is not what it looks like," she began, her voice steady, her tone carefully measured. But there was something different now, something beneath the surface that could not be hidden entirely. Not fear, not yet, but the beginning of it, the awareness that the narrative she had built was no longer hers alone to manage. Daniel did not respond immediately, and that pause, that space between her words and his silence, was more powerful than anything either of them could have said, because in that moment, he was no longer reacting, he was thinking, and once that begins, it does not easily stop. I remained where I was, not stepping forward, not stepping back, allowing the moment to belong to them, because this had never been about inserting myself into their space. It had been about removing the illusion that had shaped it. Around us, the guests remained quiet, their attention no longer scattered but focused, not on spectacle, not on drama, but on understanding, the kind that shifts a room without raising its volume. Ashley tried again, her voice softer now, more personal, as if adjusting her approach could restore control. "I went to check on something," she said, her words careful, her tone almost reassuring, but explanations built too quickly often collapse under their own weight, and this one already had. Daniel shook his head slightly, not in anger, not in accusation, but in disbelief, the kind that forms when something you trusted begins to unravel. "At 2 in the morning, he said quietly, more to himself than to her, and that was enough, enough for the room to feel the shift fully, enough for the truth to settle where it needed to. I adjusted the edge of my scarf one last time, not because it had moved, but because the gesture had become something else now, a quiet acknowledgement of what had been done and what it had revealed. And then I stepped forward just enough to be heard without interrupting, my voice calm, steady, carrying no trace of triumph, only clarity. "Some things," I said gently, "do not need to be explained. They only need to be seen." I did not look at Ashley when I spoke. I looked at Daniel, because he was the one who needed to hear it, the one who needed to decide what he would do with what had been placed in front of him. He met my gaze then, really met it, not as a son distracted by celebration, not as someone moving through a day he believed he understood, but as a man beginning to see something he had not allowed himself to see before. And in that moment, there was no anger between us, no accusation, only recognition. I gave him a small nod, not of approval, not of instruction, but of trust, and then I turned away. I did not wait for the rest. I did not stay to hear how it would be resolved, because some endings do not need witnesses. They unfold in the quiet decisions people make when they are finally left with the truth. I walked slowly toward the exit, the evening air waiting just beyond the doors, cool and steady, and as I stepped outside, the noise of the reception softened behind me, becoming something distant, something no longer mine to carry. The sky was beginning to dim, the last light of day fading into something calmer, and I paused for a moment, not to reflect, not to linger, but simply to stand in a space where nothing needed to be proven, nothing needed to be hidden. She had believed she could diminish me in silence, that she could take something visible and make it into a mark of weakness. But what she had done had revealed something else entirely, something she had not accounted for. That dignity is not something that can be taken, only something that can be abandoned, and I had not abandoned mine. I adjusted my coat, took a steady breath, and continued walking, leaving behind a room that would never quite feel the same again, and carrying with me nothing more than what I had always had, the quiet certainty of who I am, and the understanding that sometimes the strongest response is not to fight, but to let the truth stand where everyone can see it. A powerful emotional journey unfolds in this unforgettable story where a mother discovers a shocking betrayal on the most important day of her son's life. What begins as a quiet morning turns into a calculated act that reveals the hidden tension between a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law, exposing manipulation, control, and the fragile dynamics within modern family stories. Through calm observation and quiet strength, the mother refuses to react with anger, instead choosing to uncover the truth step by step, transforming what could have been humiliation into a moment of clarity and dignity. As the wedding celebration continues, subtle clues emerge, from late-night movements to carefully staged interactions, leading to a moment where truth can no longer remain hidden, a defining characteristic of compelling family stories that resonate with audiences seeking depth and realism. The daughter-in-law's carefully crafted image begins to fracture under the weight of her own actions, while the mother maintains composure, demonstrating that silence can be more powerful than confrontation, a theme often explored in meaningful family stories. This narrative captures the emotional complexity of trust, betrayal, and quiet resilience, showing how strength is not always loud but often revealed in restraint and timing, making it a standout among impactful family stories. As the truth is revealed in a calm, yet undeniable way, the focus shifts from conflict to understanding, leaving viewers reflecting on the importance of respect, boundaries, and authenticity within family stories. Ultimately, this story delivers a powerful message about dignity and self-worth, reminding us that even in moments of deep betrayal, maintaining composure and allowing truth to surface can redefine the outcome, a timeless lesson echoed across the most compelling family stories. 1. A 68-year-old white American woman with short, uneven silver hair, wearing an elegant navy blue formal dress and silk scarf covering head. Calm, serious expression, standing upright, direct front-facing view, natural lighting. No cartoon, no CGI, no illustration. 2. A 32-year-old white American woman with long blonde hair, styled perfectly, wearing a luxury white wedding gown with refined makeup and sharp, confident facial expression. Standing upright, direct, front-facing view, natural lighting. No cartoon, no CGI, no illustration.